First of all, I'd like to say thank you so much, and God bless you all. It's an absolute honor to be here. It's an absolute honor to have my wife here with me today. My sister-in-law, who has been my sister-in-law for so many years. And my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law, who are relatively new to me, it's so wonderful that you're here today. So much appreciated. Anyway, Herb says I only have 5 minutes, so I guess I better get rolling. I grew up in Calgary. I was blessed to have go off with horses all my life. And anyway, my aspirations for my life were to join the Canadian Mounted Police. And that's what I wanted to do. When I joined, it was a long process to get in. They were taking 1 out of every 40 applicants. Not like today, they can't find 40 applicants, which is very sad. But, so anyway, I will start out from the age when I was 13. I already knew what I wanted to be. But when I was 13, I was going to school with a fellow who was a Jehovah's Witness. And that was the first time I'd ever heard mention of God, because I was raised in a good home, but a home where we never attended church. There was no mention of Jesus, there was no mention of God, and there was certainly no mention of the enemy. But anyway, when I was 13, I went to my dad one day. My dad was a mechanic, and he was in the shop, and I said, Dad, can you tell me, like, what is this about God? What is this about Jesus? And he looked at me, and he said, son, it's a bunch of bunk. He said, it's garbage. He said, there's no truth to any of it. So I said, you don't believe in God? No. I said, what about Jesus? You believe in Jesus, Dad? And he said, you know, I believe there was a good man called Jesus. And I said, what about the devil? And then he said, oh my goodness. He said, that's just nonsense. So I believed my dad, and I went through my formal years believing that I was in charge of my life. So on my 18th birthday, I went to the division of the RCMP in Calgary and put in my application. At that time, it took a year, as I said, to process the application. And I was in my second year of welding apprenticeship working for a big corporation in Calgary called National Paint. And just about 2 weeks prior to my 19th birthday, because you had to be 19 to join or to get in, I got a phone call from the recruiting officer in Calgary saying, congratulations, you passed all your physicals, you passed your exams, you will begin resigning and training within 3 weeks. So I went to my dad's shop because I was still living at home, and I said, Dad, I'm not going to work tonight. I was working afternoons. I'm going out to celebrate. And he said, no, son, you're not. You weren't raised that way. You have a job, you have a responsibility, and you will go to work. Unfortunately, my dad regretted that decision for many, many years, because I went to work that night, and with no exaggeration whatsoever, an hour and a half after I got to work, 1,500 pounds of steel fell on me. And it bent me in half backwards like you would bend over to touch your toes, and my pelvis literally exploded so bad that it drove bone splinters from my pelvic area down into my knees. I remember it was a Friday night in Calgary, rush hour, and they couldn't make it to the Foothills Hospital, so they took me to Rocky View, which was just a little hospital. And I lay there waiting for a doctor for 5 hours. And by the time that happened, I was literally black from my ankles to my neck because I bled out internally. But anyway, by the grace of the God who I didn't believe in, I survived. And but they did tell me, they said it is going to be a minimum of 6 months before you can even sit up in bed, and you will likely never walk. So, the God that I didn't believe in had different ideas about that. And 5.5 weeks later, I hobbled out of that hospital on crutches. And just over a year and a quarter after that, I should just back up 1 second. While I was in the hospital, a recruiting officer from nursing, he came to see me, and he said, "This is really what you want, isn't it?" And I said, "More than you will ever know." And at that time, it was one of the toughest training courses in the world, both physically and mentally. And he said, "Oh my goodness," he said, "you are an absolute wreck." But he said, "If the doctors tell me that you make 100% recovery, we will take you." And as I say, 5.5 weeks later, I was out. And a year and a quarter later, I went into training. Training just about killed me, but I made it. My first posting was to Williams Lake, British Columbia, which was a cowboy town, and so was I, so that was absolutely wonderful. And just after being in Williams Lake for about 6 months, I met an absolutely wonderful lady by the name of Karen, who was from Saskatoon. And in 1973, I married her. And we subsequently got transferred to Merritt, British Columbia, which of course was my favorite place because it was all big ranches, and I was training horses part-time at the time, so I worked for all those big ranches on my days off, which was great. And in 1981, we got transferred to a town right down on the U.S. border called Selma, British Columbia, what they call the Selma Crescent Skyway, which is a wonderful place to bike. And on Thanksgiving weekend, the Friday of the Thanksgiving weekend of 1981, I was the only policeman working, and Karen's family were all coming out from Saskatoon to visit. And I got a call. I was sitting having coffee with a group of businessmen about 10 o'clock, and I got a call that morning that there was a very serious motor vehicle accident approximately 8 miles out of Selma. So I went and I got to the accident, and I could see that it was a vehicle, a car, and it had been hit by a logging truck. If anybody knows what a logging truck is, they're very big. So I went to the car and I looked in the driver's side. The driver was completely unrecognizable. And there was a young boy lying on the back seat of the vehicle, if you can imagine, with the engine on. That's how much impact there was to that vehicle. So I went back to the police car, and I called for the coroner because these people were definitely deceased. I called for the ambulance, and I called for the wrecker. And then I looked at the license plate of the car, and I realized that that was my car that I had just found. And that day, I cursed the God that I didn't know, that I didn't believe in. I cursed him, and I said, "You cannot possibly be this. You cannot." Anyway, they had told me, the doctors, the DVA doctor and the bone specialist, when I left the hospital at the end, they told me that you're a miracle, but you are going to experience difficulty as you go through, which meant pain. I have not had a pain-free day in 51 years, but I eventually got transferred to Kelowna, and I adopted 2 children, a daughter who was 11, Mindy, and a son who was 7, Billy. And I didn't know where to turn. I was in so much discomfort, I didn't know what to do anymore. And I actually contemplated going to the Philippines to be a witch doctor because I thought maybe that would work, because there was some stuff I read on it. And somebody said to me one day, for crying out loud, well, why don't you go and see a chiropractor? Because the force had sent me to the best bone specialist in Vancouver, who quite frankly told me there's nothing I can do. So I went to a chiropractor. I was living in Wingfield, which is between Kelowna and Vernon. And I went to a chiropractor in Wingfield, and he adjusted me twice, and he said, I don't think there's anything I can do for you. But he said, there's a guy in Vernon that might be able to do something. So I went, and I remember walking into the office that day in Vernon, and it was kind of a dark and dingy and not a very fancy place. And but I noticed on the walls there was all these signs: Jesus saves, and God is great. And I thought, oh my God, what am I doing in this place? And I was among the policemen. I had walked down a lot of dark alleys where people did not want to walk and never gave it a second thought, but I have never been that scared in my whole life. And I now realize that it was the spirit of the enemy that was living in me that was absolutely terrible with the spirit of Jesus in that day. So anyway, there was a knock on the door of the booth I was in, and this old man said, come in, young man. And this man was very slow to speak, and I'm chatty-catty. So I'm chatting away with him, and he's not even answering me. So he does an assessment of me, and he said, you are in really bad shape. And I said, I'm quite convinced of that. And so at the end of him adjusting me, I looked at him in the eye and I said, do you think there's any chance of me getting better? And he never even hesitated. He said, of course you will, young man. God's going to heal you. And this arrogant swine laughed in his face. And I said, are you kidding me? Anyway, he said, I want to see you twice a week for the next 6 months. And I started going. And he started going. And over the course of time, I started listening. And he told me about Jesus. He told me about his faith. And a chiropractic visit generally takes 10 minutes. His wife was the secretary. She started booking us for the last appointment of the day because we were in there for an hour and a half each time. And that was not getting an adjustment. That was getting a spiritual adjustment. Anyway, that man spoke to me for 9 months. 9 months. And we got to be friends, and he had a lovely home right on Kalamalka Lake outside Vernon. And he said, Bob, you don't have to go to the office all the time. If you want, you can just come to the house and I'll treat you here. So some 9 months after he had been talking to me, I went one day and I said to my son, who was 9 at the time, I said, Billy, do you want to come with me and swim in the lake while I get an adjustment? And he said, sure, Dad. And Billy was a really tough kid. He was a hockey player. I asked him when he was 9, what are you going to do when you grow up, son? He said, I'm going to play in the NHL, Dad. And I said, what if you don't make it, Bill? He said, I will make it, Dad, and he didn't. And he played in the NHL for 5 years, and he is now coaching hockey in Michigan. But to make a long story short, I get there, I have this very skewed idea of what a Christian is. I figure they all do their buttons up right here. They've got zips on their face, and this is just a crutch. Like, it's a crutch because you're weak, right? Mom. So there's another person there down at the dock with the chiropractor that day, and they both look at me, and the chiropractor says, you know, Ralph, he says, I think we have somebody here today that might possibly be ready to meet his Savior. And I'm looking around wondering, and Peter says, no, I believe he's talking about you. And I said, really? And he said, have you considered inviting Jesus into your heart as your Lord and Savior? And I said, yes, I have. And he said, would you be prepared to do that today? And I said, what can it hurt? What can it hurt, you know? But all in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, if I do this, I'm going to lose my macho appeal to my son, and da-da-da. And so they said, well, come to the house. And they had a beautiful sunroom overlooking the lake. And the next question they asked me after we get in there, they said, well, where's Billy? I said, no, don't involve him in this. Like, for crying out loud. No, we want him here. So they called Billy in, and they just sat him on a chair, and this Ralph looks at him and he said, Billy, you believe in Jesus? He says, I do. And he said, would you like to invite Jesus into your heart as your Lord and Savior? And he said, I would. And I went, oh my goodness. So my son and I got on our knees that day. And we invited Jesus into our heart as our Lord and Savior. But still in all, the enemy said, are you kidding me? Like, really? Heaven help what's going to happen when you get back up to the truck. And Billy actually looked at me and said, Dad, what have you done? So with bated breath, when we did get back in the truck that day, I looked at my 9-year-old son, and I will never forget his words. I said, Billy, what did you think about what happened there today? And he looked at me, 9 years old, and he said, Dad, that's the first time I've ever been anywhere in my whole life where there was no people. And he said, Dad, when I said the sinner's prayer and I opened my eyes, he said, the whole room came down. And I just put my hands up in the air and I said, thank you, Jesus. I was working as a detective, or what you people would commonly refer to as a detective at the time, in Kelowna, so plain clothes. And we were a pretty elite group on the upper floor of the Kelowna detachment, and I thought, what am I going to say? Like, how am I ever going to broach this? And my best friend nickname was Conan the Barbarian. I mean, he was a policeman. He really was a Greek god, you know, when in appearance. And so about a week later, he says, I need to meet you in the Safeway parking lot in Kelowna. And I said, yeah, no problem. So we meet, and we're sitting window down to window down, and he looks at me and says, what have you done? And I said, what do you mean, what? He said, have you become a Christian or something? And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, have you accepted Jesus into your heart? And I said, yes. He said, I am so mad at you. He said, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me? And a week later, he got on his knees and accepted Jesus. So talk about erasing the fears that the enemy had put in my mind. So, above and beyond there are things in my Christian walk that I can't totally understand. I can't understand why I have chronic pain every single day, because I know God is a great physician. But you know, in a lot of ways, I think it keeps me humble. And I think it gives me a chance to share with other people. And just one more quick story, and I promise I'll be done. 2 years before my retirement, I was in Vancouver on a course, and there was a lecturer there, lecturing on critical incident stress. Critical incident stress. And his name was John Walker, and he was from Australia. And I can't believe what I'm hearing because I'm sitting in class listening to this guy, and what example does he use with critical incident stress? My family. So at the lunch break, I went up to him and I said, John, you should maybe do a little more research on who you're talking about or what you're talking about. And I told him, and he said, oh my goodness. He said, I am so sorry. He said, but tell me, how did you survive that? And I said, through the love of Jesus. And I said, that is the only way I survived that. So anyway, after retirement, I wanted to train horses full time. So I moved south to Regina and put up a big indoor arena, and I trained horses professionally for 15 years there before I realized that I can still fly really well, but my landings are horrible. And I'm not getting any younger. So, but anyway, some 10 years later, my phone rang from the ranch that day, and this guy with an Australian accent says, hi, my name's John Walker. I don't know if you remember me, but I was your lecturer on critical incident stress. I said, I'll never forget you, John. He said, Bob, he said, the university wants me to come to Canada again, and they want to interview every single person that was involved in that accident. And would you be willing to undergo an interview? And I thought, oh my. So I said, John, why? He said, because I will never forget the words that you said to me in the cafeteria that day, that you made it through the love of Christ. And he said, there's so many people that don't make it through something like that. And he said, we want to help people. And he came to Canada, and he came to the ranch, and he stayed. And he didn't stay with us for a month because there were people all over that he had to interview. But he ended up interviewing everybody involved in that accident. And they ended up doing an immense study on how to help people handle critical incident stress. So, you know, out of something so devastating and so bad, God can still work it. So other people work well. And I want you to know that my testimony is hard to share because I've had a lot happen to me. But there is only one person, and you need to hear this, there is only one person who deserves the glory for this story, and it's my Lord and Savior. Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Bob. Hey, we're going to keep you here for a minute, and Kevin and Les are going to come up here right now from the Christian Motorcycle Association, and they got a word for you.
I'm Bob. On behalf of the Prairie Fire, I got two members. Good night.
And it's only slightly down.
Yeah, that's the letters.
Nice.
Wow.